In Job 11, Zophar speaks, and we covered last week how what he says ought to make us a little angry at him. His message is that Job has not suffered enough for his sins. In verse 6, know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Now, that is an incredible thing to say to Job, to his friend, especially considering that they have no specific sins that they have charged Job with. They have not come up with anything so far that they can say, you've done this, and you are reaping what you have sown. That God is just in punishing you because of this, and this. They can't do that. They don't know what sins it is that God is supposedly punishing. They are speaking out of ignorance and arrogance. And in Job 12, Job gets to answer. And he has somewhat of a sarcastic response. Now, this response goes from chapter 12 through 14. And so it's one of the longer responses that Job has. And we covered last week also how that it seems like the friends are speaking in order of age, from Eliphaz to Bildad and now Zophar. And we notice sort of the zeal behind Zophar, and the way Job responds to him seems to indicate that Job is older than Zophar and more experienced than Zophar. And so let's dig back into how Job responds. Now, this morning I'm teaching from the ESV because it clarifies a few things that are a little jumbled in the King James Version. And so if there's a difference in what I'm reading and what you are, that's the reason. Verse 2 is dripping with sarcasm. Yep, you're the people. You're the ones. You know everything. When you die, all wisdom will vanish from the earth because you are the holder of all the wisdom. But then he says, but I understand as well as you. In fact, Job understands better than they do because Job understands that he doesn't know what's going on. And they believe that they do when they don't. And so he says, I'm not inferior to you. In fact, the things that you have said are the obvious things, are the things that everybody knows. And so, they have used things that were true to misapply toward Job. Eliphaz especially did that in the first speech against Job. But they have hints of truth in the things that they're saying, but then they twist them and misapply them to Job. And so, but they have a very shallow understanding of what's going on. And so they are not thinking deeply about these things. And so he says, everybody knows what you're talking about, but you pretend to use those things to be so very wise. These verses are one of the reasons why I'm using the English Standard Version this morning. And so let me read it to you from there. I am a laughingstock to my friends. I who called to God and he answered me, a just and blameless man, am a laughingstock. In the thought of one who is at ease, there is contempt for misfortune. It is ready for those whose feet slip. The tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure, who bring their God in their hand. And so he said, I'm a laughingstock to people who ought to love me and not ever, laugh me to scorn, but they are mocking him. But Job is the one who is called to God and been answered. He is a just and blameless man, and yet his friends have turned against him. And they turned against him because of what Job describes in verse 5 as his misfortune. And so it says there in verse 5, the thought of one who is at ease, who doesn't have anything bad happening to them, he has contempt for the one who has bad things happen to him, or for his misfortune. And so because their idea is that all misfortune, all suffering is a result of God punishing your sin, then if you are suffering, you are a sinner and worthy of, in their eyes, being mocked and being rebuked. Their contempt is ready for those whose feet slip. So they are always ready to pounce. Anytime misfortune has come upon them, they are quick to run to them and demand that they repent so that this will go away, not knowing why someone is suffering, attributing it all to this one reason. And yet Job notices something, that there are people who are known robbers, but they live at peace. There are those who provoke God openly, and yet they're not suffering. Things seem to be going well for them. They live in security. Now, there is a difference in the last part of verse 6 between the King James and the English Standard Version that sort of changed the meaning of the phrase, but not the overall point. In the English Standard Version, who bring their God in their hand. And so it would be referring to those who have made their idols, they're idol worshipers, and yet they're living securely. But in King James Version, into whose hand God bringeth abundantly. Talking specifically not about idolatry, but how God has blessed those who are robbers and provoke God. And so the overall meaning doesn't change between the two different translations. That he has made this observation that if all suffering is the result of evil, why do clearly evil people seem to have everything go well for them? Why aren't they suffering? And so he turns around the scenario on them, and it's a question they can't answer. It says, look at nature. How can we find out all the deep things of God, seeing He has made all these things, and the hand of God is the one behind all these things. And in verse 10, in His hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. And so we know that God is behind these events, but we don't know His purposes. We don't know why these things are happening. And so he's going to launch off of that idea here in the next few verses. You taste your food to see whether it's good. Job asks Zophar, does your ear not test out words the same way to see if they're good, see if they're healthy, see if they're right? And so he's basically accusing Zophar of speaking out of turn and speaking about things he knows nothing of. That what he's saying is foolishness, but Zophar hasn't taken the time and effort to make sure what he's saying is right and that it's good and healthy. And verse 12 indicates to us that Job is putting Zophar in his place because Job is older and more experienced and wiser than Zophar. Wisdom is with the aged, and understanding in length of days. Now notice he didn't say that to Eliphaz. He didn't even say that to Bildad. But he has the Zophar. And so it seems like there is a sort of a hierarchy of age among the three friends. And Zophar is speaking out of turn and speaking unwisely. That he hadn't tested out what he was saying against what is good and right and true. Once again, talking about the wisdom and power of God seen in nature. With God are wisdom and might. He has counsel and understanding. And so in the world, he he tears down, and no one can rebuild what he tears down. He shuts someone in, and they can't open it to get out. And so, once again, talking about the power of God, and especially as seen and what is happening to Job. Again, Job and his friends believe that God is the one who has done all this to Job. And we know different. We know it was Satan who did this under the allowance of God. But all this was a demonstration of the power of God. He sends drought and floods. Verse 15, if he withholds the waters, they dry up. If he sends them out, they overwhelm the land. And so God's power is seen in all directions, and everything we see in nature, that he is wise and that he is powerful. And as Job has said before, how can he speak up against God in any of these things? And so Job is in a place of utter confusion, as should the friends be. They should be confused about things because they hadn't been revealed what actually is happening yet. They only have their assumptions to go on, and their assumptions aren't right. Next section is verses 16 through 25, and we're going to look at this all together because it's the same point being made in a variety of different ways. How God works in the world and fulfills his purposes, and how no one on earth, no matter how powerful, no matter how much authority they have, no matter how much wealth and wisdom they have, they can't stand up to God. And so let's read it together. Beginning in verse 16. With him are strength and sound wisdom, with God, that is. The deceived and the deceiver are his. He leads counselors away stripped, and judges he makes fools. He looses the bonds of kings and binds a waistcloth on their hips. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows the mighty. Verse 20, he deprives of speech those who are trusted and takes away the discernment of the elders. He pours contempt on princes and loosens the belt of the strong. He uncovers the deeps out of darkness and brings deep darkness to light. He makes nations great, and he destroys them. He enlarges nations and leads them away. He takes away understanding from the chiefs of the people of the earth and makes them wander in a trackless waste. They grope in the dark without light. He makes them stagger like a drunken man. The overall point of all that is that no matter how wise and strong and powerful you are nothing against God. And so all these powerful people of the earth, God has brought down. And of course, we know that even more than Job did, because we have history, many more years of history that we can look at and see nations rise and fall, about people who were thought to be the wisest and greatest on the earth be made foolish. Job had experienced these things and seen these things on earth, observed them, and knew them to be true. And so who is Zophar to stand up and try to speak for God? That is the point that he's getting to, and that's going to be revealed in the next chapter. And so who is Zophar compared to all these people that God has brought down that couldn't stand up to God? Much less Zophar taking on the role of speaking on behalf of God. My eye has seen all of this. My ear has heard and understood it. I know all these things that you've already said. I'm not inferior to you, verse 2. What you know, I know. And so Job says, I don't want to have this back and forth with you. I don't want to have to plead my cause to you. I want to reason with God. I would like to have a conversation with God. Now, what's going to be interesting is Job's going to get the opportunity to do that, and Job is going to be speechless. He's not even going to attempt to speak to God, because what Job has already said about God is the truth, that no one can stand up to his wisdom and his power. And Job knows that intellectually, and he's going to know that empirically very soon as well. He said, I desire to argue my case or reason with God. Now, that was the point of his response to Bildad in chapter 9 and 10. That, I just want to have this opportunity, even though I know I can't. I know I wouldn't be able to stand up against God and actually argue my cause. I would like the opportunity. And then chapter 10 is where he says, if I had the opportunity to talk to God, here's what I would say. And so he returns to that theme here in verse 3, that he just wants to have a discussion with God and not with Zophar or Eliphaz and Bildad. And so now we know that he is speaking to all three in what he says here in verse 4. As for you, you are forgers of lies, or here in the English Standard Version, you whitewash with lies. You don't know what you're saying. And Job is accusing them not just of being ignorant, but saying things they know to be false. Right? He accuses them here of lying. It seems that they know that Job has not sinned so grievously, but they're trying to hold on to their theory of the world. All right, so much of what they know of the world is contingent on this idea that all suffering is the result of evil. It's a comforting thought to them. All right, it's what they have based their worldview on, and we can understand through our own personal experience and observation of what goes on in the world, that when someone has based their identity or based their worldview on a particular idea, when that idea is shown to be false, it messes with us psychologically. It can feel like our whole world is crashing down when it's not. We just found out that we were wrong about something. And sometimes it's a big thing, and sometimes it's not. And so they're willing to sort of push the truth that they know to be true aside to hold on to this idea. And so they whitewash it with lies. And they are worthless physicians. All right, they are of no help. What good have they brought from coming to visit Job? As soon as they started to speak, things got worse. And so he says, oh, that you would keep silent. Just please be quiet. Just sit with me in silence for a while. It would be your wisdom. And that is wisdom, knowing when not to say something, because it's always our response to want to do something, to want to say something, and sometimes it's best to just keep our lips closed. And so it'd be wise for them to stop talking because they're ignorant about these things. So Job tells them that, they have taken it upon themselves to speak out in the place of God or on behalf of God. And so instead of, Job is sort of liking this to a courtroom where he is on one side and God is on the other. And his friends are the jury or the judge or the witnesses or whatever. But they are all aligned on God's side. Now, on the surface of it, that doesn't seem like such a bad thing, right? Except they're not really on God's side. They are on the side of what they think God is, or who they think God is. And so that's why Job says, will you show partiality toward him? Or I think the King James Version says, have respect of persons for God. And so they're not being equal or fair in their assessments of what's going on, because they are only on the side of the God they know, which is punishing Job for his evil, without thinking about any other possibility, without listening to Job, without hearing his side of things. Now, understand that they are not actually on God's side. They just think that they are. And they are not searching out for truth. So it's like a jury that has made up their mind before the case ever begins. They don't listen to arguments from both sides. They don't look at evidence presented by both sides, only one side. And so they are speaking falsely for God to try to protect him. All right? It's like they're getting on the witness stand and saying what they think God needs them to say to protect his identity, who is the punisher of Job's sins. And so they have it all wrong. And so it says in verse 9, will it be well with you when he searches you out? Or can you deceive him as one deceives a man? And so it said there's going to come a time when you're going to have to answer for the things that you've said about God, and they would at the end of this book. But God doesn't need them to lie for him or to slant things in his favor. He is the almighty, all-wise God. But they've taken it on themselves to do that. So he will rebuke you if you show partiality, if you show respect to persons. Now that's an interesting side thought for us. We don't like it when people are partial against us. We also not like it when people are partial for us. So Job is saying that God is going to rebuke them for trying to pick his side ignorantly, and showing partiality toward him and not fairness in the situation. Because God doesn't need that partiality. God doesn't need them to cover up for him or to prop him up. Will not his majesty terrify you and the dread of him fall upon you? In verse 12, in the English Standard Version says your maxims are proverbs of ashes. Your defenses are defenses of clay, meaning they're powerless, they're weak. They don't stand the test of time or assault. All right, they will be done away quickly. So the things that they have said are fruitless, they're powerless, they're empty. We talked about near the beginning of this study how that when Job responds, there is a pattern that he goes through. He starts out very low, and he finishes very low. But in the middle, there are these statements of hope and encouragement. And that's what we have found here in these verses. So he tells his friends to leave me alone, just be quiet for a little bit and let me speak. And if what I say angers God and he takes his vengeance on me, I'll accept my punishment. Call me what may. Even if he were to slay me, I'm still going to hope in him. I will argue my ways to his face. And so Job still has utter confidence and trust in God. Job never loses that. He has confusion about why God is doing these things to him or even allowing it. But he still has his hope in God. He still wants to have this face-to-face conversation with God about what's happening. And so this will be my salvation. This will be my deliverance. That the godless shall not come before him. Job sees it as sort of a testing ground to see if he still is right with God, if he's going to be able to actually speak to him and have this conversation with him. This will be his deliverance, his salvation.